Picture a scorching desert highway, nothing but open roads stretching for miles. And then, out of nowhere, a gang of ruthless bikers launches an ambush on what they think is just a lone female truck driver. Little do they know she is a highly trained Delta Force operative, ready and able to defend herself against any threat. How does this tense face-off unfold? Will her deadly skills be enough to protect innocent lives from a gang that will stop at nothing to seize control of this dusty outpost? To find out, you've got to hear the entire story, every nail-biting confrontation, every daring escape, and every stirring act of courage. We'll reveal each pulse-pounding twist right here, so buckle up for a wild ride. If you love gritty tales of heroes facing impossible odds, subscribe to our channel now. You won't want to miss more action-packed stories that celebrate real bravery and the unwavering human spirit. Hit that subscribe button and join us on this incredible journey. The dawn light was a cool, bluish haze that stretched over a high desert highway, that lonely road bisecting an ocean of dust and rugged outcroppings. For miles upon miles, nothing but the stark beauty of sagebrush and ancient rock formations greeted travelers, punctuated occasionally by ramshackle towns or neglected roadside stops. In this particular corner of nowhere stood a humble establishment called High Desert Oasis, a diner and truck stop run by a widowed owner named Annalise Harlow. Weather-beaten signage and modest gas pumps set the scene. It was a quintessential American pit stop where caffeine, eggs, and dusty boots converged. Folks passing through, ranchers, tourists, cross-country drivers, often lamented the lack of flash, but they returned for Annalise's legendary pies and bottomless coffee. Rolling onto the lot in a behemoth of an 18-wheeler was Morgan Lane, a quiet woman in her mid-30s who bore the weight of a hidden past. At first glance, Morgan seemed just another long-haul truck driver, with tired eyes and a ball cap pulled low over her short auburn hair. But there was an alertness to her, a subtle tension in the shoulders, the way her gaze swept the area with practiced precision. She slipped the rig into park and jumped down, dust trailing off the knees of her jeans. After 16 hours on the road, her limbs ached, and she could practically taste the promise of bacon and hot coffee inside. Inside High Desert Oasis, the ambiance was both familiar and dated. Faded linoleum floors, scuffed wooden booths, and photos on the walls depicting local rodeos from decades gone by. A neon clock hummed above the counter, reading 6:05 a.m. A couple of bleary-eyed patrons were scattered around, sipping coffee and flipping through newspapers. Grace Bonner, the young server whose energy often kept the diner afloat, greeted Morgan with a smile. Grace was in her mid-20s, sporting curly hair pulled into a messy bun and a countenance that radiated warmth. She asked, "What can I get for you?" as she poured a steaming cup of coffee into a chipped mug. Morgan inhaled the aroma, finally relaxing in the booth she chose near a window. The diner's other occupant was a rancher in a corner seat, his weathered hat resting on the table, boots caked in mud. He offered a polite nod to Morgan before returning to his bacon. The calm was palpable. Morgan's mind, though, rarely settled. Even stateside, after leaving behind the code names, the hush-hush ops, and the adrenaline bursts of her former occupation, she found it hard to fully let her guard down. After all, she had been part of an elite military unit once, Delta Force, where each mission overseas had sharpened her reflexes, her sense of self-preservation, and her readiness to act on a moment's notice. In the midst of the diner's simple morning routine, trouble was already brewing on the horizon. The desert highways had recently become prime territory for a biker gang known as the Iron Nomads, notorious for hijacking trucks and extorting small businesses in out-of-the-way places. Rumors drifted through trucker lounges that these bikers had expanded from petty theft to dangerous organized crime, trafficking, extortion, and violent assaults. Their presence was like a dark cloud creeping into the region's clear skies, fueling an undercurrent of fear in the local folks who feared being squeezed out of their own livelihoods. Morgan sipped her coffee, scanning the diner's interior with an instinct she couldn't quite switch off. No immediate red flags, just that sense of foreboding that once saved her life on foreign soil. She was due westward, hauling a trailer loaded with important medical supplies. If she timed it right, she would make her drop before sundown. But as she watched Grace juggling the orders with an upbeat smile, Morgan felt a twinge of sympathy. These locals didn't know what storm might be heading their way, And for Morgan, that conflict between staying under the radar and stepping in to help always gnawed at her. For now, she just wanted to fill her belly, get some rest, and be gone in an hour. Fate, however, had other plans. A short while later, Annalise Harlow herself came out from the kitchen to refill the coffee pot. She was a tall woman in her late 50s, with gentle crow's feet that suggested a life spent both laughing and worrying. Her late husband had built up high desert oasis from a rusty trailer lot into a passable diner, and Annalise had fought tooth and nail to keep it going after he passed. She greeted Morgan warmly, her motherly instincts perceiving the fatigue beneath Morgan's stoic exterior. "You look like you've been driving all night, dear," she said softly, setting down a plate of scrambled eggs and toast. Before Morgan could respond, the diner's door clanged open, and two men in biker vests ambled in. The patches on their backs displayed a stylized gear with a howling skull inside, emblems of the Iron Nomads. A hush fell over the small crowd. Even Grace, normally unflappable, stiffened as she approached them with a forced smile. "Help you fellas?" she asked, pot of coffee in hand. The men looked around. One was squat with a shaved head, the other tall with a ragged mustache. Their expressions conveyed cocky confidence as they took a booth near the entrance. "Sure," the tall one said, glancing at the name tag on Grace's uniform. "Coffee black, and keep it coming." He then fixed his gaze on Annalise, who hovered near Morgan's booth. "We hear you're the owner. We got some business to discuss." Sensing trouble, Morgan kept her eyes on her plate, but her hearing razor sharp. She had learned to blend into the background, appearing an unassuming observer while absorbing every scrap of intel. Annalise set the coffee pot on a table and moved a bit closer. "If this is about me selling the diner," she said, voice tight, "I'm not interested. Told your buddies as much last week. This place isn't on the market." The squat biker scowled. "That's a shame. Could be you want to rethink that. Things are about to get complicated on these highways." Everyone in the diner felt the veiled threat in the air. The rancher in the corner shifted uncomfortably, looking like he might slip out if he could. Grace's knuckles whitened around the coffee pot handle. Annalise stood her ground, refusing to be cowed. Morgan respected that, but she also recognized the fuse that had just been lit. These men were testing the waters, measuring how far they could push. "That's all you got to say?" the mustache biker asked, leaning forward. "We're offering you a way out." Annalise squared her shoulders. "I told your friend before, I'm not selling." "Suit yourself," the squat one said with a derisive snort, then jerked his thumb for Grace to refill his mug. They'd made their point, for now, but Morgan knew how these dynamics played out. A threat, followed by a waiting period, followed by something far more severe. She tried to maintain the mask of casual indifference, finishing her breakfast with controlled bites. She paid her bill and gave Grace a small, reassuring nod on her way out. Beneath the veneer of calm, Morgan's heart beat with simmering tension. She recognized the look in the biker's eyes. They'd come back. Stepping outside, she squinted against the morning glare. Her big rig stood in a neat row of semis, silent giants in the sunlight. She could slip behind the wheel and drive on, leaving these dusty troubles behind. But from her vantage, she could see the bikers through the diner's windows, still talking with Annalise. A quiet alarm rose in her chest. She had no official duty here, no direct order to defend these people. That life, structured by missions, intel, and rosters, was gone. Yet how could she ignore what felt like an impending avalanche? Exhaling slowly, Morgan resolved to deliver her cargo as planned, but something in her gut whispered she'd be back. Whether by choice or happenstance, High Desert Oasis would soon become ground zero. In a standoff neither side could afford to lose. For a good portion of the day, Morgan guided her 18-wheeler across shimmering asphalt. The desert stretched on, painted in sun-baked hues of tan and gold. She flicked off the radio, preferring the hum of the engine and her own thoughts to the mindless chatter of talk stations. Memories of her Delta Force service filtered into her mind unbidden. The hush of a transport plane before a drop, the adrenaline jolt from an incoming firefight. She'd left that life behind because it had stolen too much. Friends, innocence, peace. Yet the training, the discipline, the watchfulness still clung to her like a second skin. That afternoon, Morgan pulled into a larger truck stop an hour's drive from High Desert Oasis for fuel. Pumping diesel, she overheard other truckers discussing a biker gang that had been robbing rigs on remote roads. They strike at night sometimes, one driver said, eyes darting anxiously. Snag electronics, valuables, even the entire trailer if it's worth it. Another added, heard they cornered a small restaurant outside of town too. Forced the owner to pay them for protection. Morgan's jaw tightened. Her suspicions confirmed. The Iron Nomads were stepping up their game. After fueling, she kept driving, determined to make her scheduled drop-off, but the sense of foreboding never left. By late afternoon, she arrived at a distribution center to unload medical supplies. The foreman gave her an odd look when she explained she was late due to road issues, but at least they didn't dock her pay. Once unhooked, she was free to pick up a new cargo. The yard manager offered her a loaded trailer bound north. Morgan considered it, checked the route, and realized it would bypass the region near High Desert Oasis. Then she hesitated. Should she avoid that area entirely or circle back to see if Annalise was all right? The safer choice, the more rational one, was to take the longer run, collect her paycheck, and stay clear of trouble. She owed no one an explanation. But as she stood in that dusty cargo yard, her mind replayed how those bikers had looked at Annalise. She recognized intimidation tactics, shaking down small-time owners who lacked the manpower to resist. Even if the sheriff knew, local authorities might be underfunded, or worse, unwilling to confront the gang head-on. Morgan tried to brush it off. Not my fight, she told herself. Yet it stuck like a burr under the saddle. She tapped an old contact in her phone, a basic law enforcement dispatch line, only to learn that no official crackdowns were planned. They'd keep an eye out. Standard response. Exhaling, Morgan made up her mind. She politely turned down the northbound hall, saying she needed a short break before committing to the next route. Then she drove her rig to a nearby motel, intending to rest up. Dusk settled in as she parked behind the building. Instead of heading straight to bed, she rummaged in her duffel bag, pulling out a sidearm and a spare magazine. She stared at the weapon, a wave of conflicting emotions crashing over her. It had been months since she'd even considered needing it, but the Iron Nomad's aggression signaled it might be wise to stay armed, just in case. With that unspoken vow, Morgan locked the pistol in a discreet compartment. She climbed into the lumpy motel bed, exhaustion seeping into her bones. Yet her thoughts swirled around possible events at High Desert Oasis. Whether she wanted it or not, her path was bound to cross with those bikers again. Rest, for the moment, was the only thing she could do. Sure enough, the next morning Morgan woke to a phone buzzing on the nightstand. It was an unrecognized number with a local area code. She answered groggily, and a shaky voice on the other end stammered, Is this Morgan Lane? This is Grace from the Oasis Diner. I hope you don't mind me calling. Morgan sat upright, the hairs on her neck prickling. Grace, what's going on? In hushed tones, Grace explained that after Morgan left, more bikers from the Iron Nomads had visited that night. They'd broken a window, sprayed their grim logo across the diner's exterior, and threatened to come back if Annalise didn't sell or pay them off. The local sheriff's deputy had taken a statement, but the gang was nowhere to be found by the time law enforcement arrived. Annalise was putting on a brave face, but Grace admitted she was scared to death. I remember you seemed capable, Grace said, voice trembling. I'm sorry if this is out of line, but I just don't know who else to call. Morgan's gut clenched. Fear and a sense of duty tangled in her chest. She assured Grace she would swing by. After all, it wasn't like she had urgent cargo to haul. She'd parted ways with the job at the distribution center. With a quick shower and a change of clothes, Morgan hopped into the cab of her truck, a sense of grim purpose guiding her back down that desert highway. By midday, she was cruising that same two-lane stretch, the endless expanse of arid land surrounding her. This time, her eyes scanned the horizon for any sign of motorcycles. Memories flickered. Convoy escorts overseas, scanning for IEDs. She shook off the old ghosts. Yet her approach to High Desert Oasis was cautious. She braked near a vantage point a few hundred yards off, using binoculars to check for suspicious activity. Only a couple of parked cars, plus a battered pickup she recognized as belonging to a local rancher. Seemed safe for the moment. Rolling into the lot, Morgan could see fresh scars on the diner's outer wall. Black paint, jagged and menacing, had been partially scrubbed away, but the outline of a skull was still discernible. The front window was boarded up. Annalise, looking both relieved and exhausted, rushed out to greet Morgan as she stepped down from the rig. They came last night, Annalise confirmed in a subdued voice. A few hours after we closed. Grace was cleaning up, and they shattered the window, told me to get on board with their offer. They were trying to run us out. Annalise's eyes shone with a mixture of fury and helplessness. Grace appeared in the doorway, offering a half-smile that didn't quite hide her anxiety. Together, they walked Morgan around the property, pointing out the damage. And the sheriff? Morgan asked. Annalise exhaled. Deputy Marshal took a report. Says the station is short-handed. The gang moves around so much it's hard to catch them. They're not going to station a patrol here day and night, that's for sure. Morgan pursed her lips. She recalled times when local police in conflict zones simply didn't have the resources, leaving villagers at the mercy of warlords unless someone else intervened. Here, the concept repeated itself in a small American desert town. Morgan's instincts began whirring. How to fortify, how to organize watchers, how to plan a defense. But she tamped down the swirl of strategies, reminding herself she was no longer active duty. Look, she said quietly, I can help you coordinate with some local folks, maybe set up a neighborhood watch. The Iron Nomads thrive on isolation and fear. If the ranchers, store owners, everyone cooperates, it might deter them. A spark of hope flickered in Grace's eyes, while Annalise nodded solemnly. If Morgan could teach them to stand together, maybe they had a shot. Yet deep down, Morgan feared the gang's next wave would be far more violent. They decided to meet that very evening after the diner closed, inviting a handful of local allies who'd shown concern about the rising threat. Word traveled fast through the county. Ranchers who resented the encroachment on their land, small business owners who worried about vandalism, and even an off-duty deputy who recognized they needed more than a meager patrol. By 8 p.m., the last paying customers were gone. Annalise locked the doors, and the small group gathered around a few rearranged tables in the dimly lit diner. Morgan wore a light jacket to hide the sidearm she now carried. She wasn't sure if brandishing a gun openly would help or scare people. Among the assembled was the local mechanic, Eli Granger, who ran the only service garage within 30 miles. He was a stocky man in his 60s with grease-stained hands and a voice like gravel. These punks tried to get me to close the garage some nights so they could do private business, he said with a scowl. Told them to get lost. Now I'm getting weird calls at night, threatening messages. I'm fed up. Next to him was Officer Delgado, the off-duty deputy who had grown up around these parts. He explained the sheriff's office simply lacked manpower to run constant patrols. I can't officially sanction a vigilante group, he said, but if we have some sort of structured watch, it might help us respond quicker. Morgan spread out a map of the local highways and pointed to High Desert Oasis. This is a crucial point for them, I suspect. It's remote enough to hide illegal activities and a good waypoint for truck cargo. If Annalise refuses to sell or pay them off, the gang might escalate. She glanced at Grace. But if we collaborate, post watchers, share phone lines, and keep each other informed, maybe we can minimize damage and coordinate responses. The group murmured in agreement, though the tension was palpable. None of them were soldiers. They were ranchers, mechanics, waitresses. Yet Morgan sensed a stubborn determination in these people. They were fighting for their homes and livelihoods. Annalise had quietly prepared a pot of coffee. She refilled mugs, offering a semblance of normalcy. If they come again, we need at least some plan, she said. I'm not looking for a war, just enough deterrence to show we won't be pushed around. Morgan nodded, drawing on old knowledge gleaned from field manuals. She suggested reinforcing windows with shutters or boards, installing motion sensor lights, and forming a rotating night watch among the ranchers who were proficient with firearms. None of it guaranteed safety, but it gave them a chance to slow any attack until law enforcement could arrive. Officer Delgado gave a half shrug. Better than letting them pick us off one by one, he said, though he warned that the gang could retaliate if they discovered an organized resistance. Morgan's stomach twisted. She knew that if the Iron Nomads realized someone with serious combat training was guiding these locals, they might bring in heavier muscle. We must maintain a low profile, she said. Just look out for each other and communicate. If you see suspicious bikes, text the group chat. She offered instructions on basic perimeter checks. Then they concluded the meeting. As people filed out, Grace came over, eyes brimming with gratitude. Thank you, she whispered, hugging Morgan impulsively. I just hope we're not getting you in trouble. Morgan returned the hug. Better trouble than regrets. She was aware that her presence might indeed attract more danger, but she couldn't walk away now. Something had shifted, maybe in the face of bullies. That sense of responsibility she once channeled into secret missions had found a new home, protecting unsuspecting civilians on American soil. As the diner's lights dimmed, Morgan felt both anxious and oddly at peace, stepping into a role she thought she'd left behind forever. The next day dawned deceptively calm. Morgan rose early from a spare cot Annalise had set up in a back room behind the diner's kitchen. Her sidearm slept under her pillow, a habit from her old life that had resurrected all too naturally. As sunlight crept through the boarded window, she did a quick stretch, wincing at a phantom ache in her shoulder. She recalled that bullet which once grazed her in a faraway land, a memory all too similar to the threat now looming here. Grace was already bustling about, serving coffee to a handful of customers who were mostly truckers passing through. They eyed the boarded window with curiosity, and some asked if the place had been robbed. Annalise managed to deflect their questions, unwilling to escalate gossip. Morgan, meanwhile, sipped her own brew at the counter, scanning the horizon through the cracks of the makeshift barrier. She half expected to see dust trails from approaching bikes, but all remained still. Just before noon, the door chimed, and in walked Officer Delgado, uniform on this time. He tipped his hat to Annalise, then approached Morgan, leaning in with a hush. "We've got a lead that a couple of iron nomads are holed up in an abandoned property a few miles west of here," he said. "Can't confirm if it's the main crew, but we're thinking of checking it out later." Morgan frowned. This was a chance to disrupt them preemptively, but the deputy was constrained by protocols. Could local law enforcement handle a direct confrontation? Possibly not. She nodded slowly. "Be cautious," she replied. "They might have lookouts or booby traps." After Delgado left, the afternoon hours dragged. The diner saw a lull in customers. Morgan spent time walking the perimeter with Eli, the mechanic, who had come by to deliver some extra materials for reinforcing the back door. He pointed out that the desert behind the diner offered hidden approaches if someone knew the terrain. "Used to be old livestock paths," he said. "They could sneak up from behind if we're not vigilant." Morgan's mind churned with tactical considerations. Vantage points, lines of sight, fallback positions. She couldn't help it. Her training whispered constantly. Mid-afternoon arrived with a swirl of dust devils dancing in the parking lot. A battered sedan rolled in, out of which stepped a weary traveler seeking directions. Morgan felt the tension in her shoulders ease, relieved it wasn't a biker scouting run. But that calm was short-lived. Around 4 p.m., a local rancher who joined the watch group came barreling into the diner, face ashen. He'd spotted about 6 bikers on a desert road, presumably iron nomads, heading in the direction of an old salvage yard not far from the oasis. "They looked loaded for trouble," he said out of breath. "They had rifles strapped on their bikes." Alarm rippled through the small staff. Morgan quickly texted everyone in the group chat. 6 bikers spotted near salvage yard. Heads up. Some responded they would lock down or stay extra vigilant. Officer Delgado replied that he'd be en route with backup, though backup likely meant just one more deputy. Annalise closed the diner early, not wanting to risk a full house of unsuspecting customers if trouble ignited. The tension was nearly tangible as they shuttered windows and turned off the neon sign out front. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Morgan, Annalise, and Grace took up positions inside, an improvised plan in place. If the bikers arrived, Morgan would try to hold them at bay or delay until Delgado arrived. Grace would keep the phone lines open, while Annalise stayed near the kitchen with a sturdy shotgun that once belonged to her husband. The staff's hearts hammered collectively. In her quiet corner, Morgan thought, "This is it. Either they come tonight or they wait until fear erodes us from within." Night fell swiftly. The moonless sky wrapped the desert in near-total darkness, with only faint starlight glinting off the dusty vehicles in the lot. Inside High Desert Oasis, every noise seemed amplified. The hum of the freezer, the soft clicks of the kitchen pipes, and the rapid breathing of those bracing for a confrontation. Morgan positioned herself where she had a partial view of the parking area through a gap in the boarded window. Her sidearm felt cold against her waist, a reassurance of readiness. Hours crawled past with no sign of the bikers. Annalise made a pot of strong coffee to keep them alert. Grace paced, occasionally peeking outside, her nerves worn thin. Around 11 p.m., the group chat chimed. Eli was monitoring the road from his truck parked a few hundred yards away. His text read, "Possibly two bikes approaching from the east. Lights off." The tension soared. Morgan inhaled, checking her weapon one last time. Minutes later, two sets of headlights flickered near the highway turnoff. They paused, scanning. The diner was dark, sign off, looking deserted. Slowly, the bikes rolled into the lot. Morgan could make out silhouettes, both riders wearing helmets and vests. They circled the building once, engines idling. She exchanged a glance with Grace, who hovered near the phone, ready to punch in the group call. Annalise gripped her shotgun in the kitchen doorway. One rider dismounted, creeping around the back of Morgan's parked rig. Morgan tracked the shape as best she could in the gloom, heart thrumming. If they tried sabotage, she had to act. Her instincts flared. She stood, signaled Annalise and Grace to stay put, then slipped quietly out the back door. Keeping low, she pressed against the wall, inching around the corner. Sure enough, the figure was fiddling with something at the truck's wheels. Morgan crouched behind a trash bin, her mind swirling with images of cut brake lines or planted explosives. No time to wait. She stepped out, gun raised. "Hands where I can see them," she growled. "Now." A startled yelp escaped the biker, who sprang upright. Morgan saw it was a woman, her face partially covered by a bandana, a switchblade glinting in her hand. "Stay back," the biker hissed. Morgan's tone hardened. "Drop the blade, or I drop you." For a tense second, the woman hesitated, then lunged. Morgan sidestepped, hooking her arm to dislodge the blade. The scuffle was brief. Morgan's old training was far superior to a street fighter's. She pinned the woman, disarming her. The biker cursed and spat. "You'll regret this." "The Iron Nomads don't let stuff slide." Morgan forced her to the ground. "We'll see about that." From the darkness came a sudden roar of an engine. The second bike revved, clearly about to bolt. Morgan tightened her hold on the captured biker. "Your friend's leaving you behind," Morgan said coldly. As if on cue, the motorcycle sped off into the night, headlights flaring as it merged back on the highway. Morgan exhaled, adrenaline coursing. So much for a big assault. Maybe it was just recon or a sabotage attempt. She twisted the biker's arms behind her, fishing out a zip tie from her jacket pocket. Moments later, Grace and Annalise burst out the back door, brandishing phone and shotgun. The sight of Morgan crouched over the subdued biker was both startling and comforting. "Holy smokes," Grace breathed. Annalise moved in. "Inside, hurry." They half-dragged the biker indoors, shutting and locking the door. She struggled, spewing threats about how Raven, the rumored Iron Nomads leader, would make them pay. Morgan's jaw clenched. This was no idle boast. They phoned Officer Delgado, who arrived within 15 minutes, lights flashing. He arrested the biker, cuffing her while she snarled with hatred. "Better watch your backs," she spat. "You have no idea who you're messing with." Watching the patrol car drive off into the dark, Morgan knew this small victory would draw swift retaliation. The Iron Nomads had lost one of their own. Their retribution would likely be more organized, more violent. As the calm of night reclaimed the parking lot, Morgan could feel the weight of an inevitable escalation pressing down like a desert storm on the horizon. Sure enough, by dawn, the news spread that an Iron Nomad member had been apprehended at High Desert Oasis. The local grapevine buzzed, while a few dared hope that maybe this spelled an end to the gang's intimidation. Morgan wasn't so optimistic. Over a hasty breakfast of toast and eggs, she confided to Grace and Annalise that such arrests typically provoke the gang's wrath. She advised fortifying the diner as much as possible while they still had a window of time. They spent the morning hammering plywood reinforcements across vulnerable spots, adding an extra deadbolt to the back door. Customers who arrived mid-repair were politely redirected to a side window for coffee orders. Some raised eyebrows. Others gave supportive nods, already hearing whispers of the new no-nonsense woman who'd intervened. Eli stopped by with more supplies, rolling up in his pickup. He shook his head at the boarded windows. "Never seen it come to this," he muttered. "Hope we're not just painting a bigger target on ourselves." Meanwhile, Officer Delgado called with an update. The arrested biker had lawyered up, claiming Morgan used excessive force. Delgado believed the charges would stick against her anyway. Attempted sabotage of property, But if the Iron Nomads posted bail, she'd be out soon enough. We're going to keep a closer watch, Delgado promised, but the local jail can only hold her so long. The undercurrent was clear. It was only a matter of time before a bigger confrontation arrived. Morgan tried to manage the swirling concern in her head, focusing on the tangible tasks, checking perimeter lines, distributing contact numbers, confirming a rotation for night watchers among local ranchers. Word came in from the watch group that more bikers, possibly 4, had been spotted east of the county at sunrise, near a ranch that had recently refused the gang's demands. The aggression was becoming systematic, a push to claim territory through fear. Thinking back to her Delta missions, Morgan recognized the pattern: infiltration, intimidation, and controlling key choke points. That afternoon, she learned that a feed store north of the diner had been vandalized. The owners found the Iron Nomads logo scrawled across their tractor. They were too frightened to fight back. The phone rang off the hook at High Desert Oasis, with neighbors asking for advice or reporting suspicious vehicles. Annalise juggled calls while Grace tried to keep the diner operational for the few brave customers. Morgan began to question how far the gang would go. She shuddered at the possibility of them setting the place ablaze or storming in with guns. At around 3 o'clock, a distant rumble sounded, motorcycles, but not close enough to see. Morgan and Grace paused, listening anxiously. After a moment, the noise faded, possibly passing travelers or maybe scouting Iron Nomads. Each instance hammered home the precariousness of their situation. Annalise, despite her unwavering backbone, appeared more fatigued by the hour. Morgan told her, "We'll handle it. Get some rest if you can." But Annalise shook her head. "Not while bullies roam free." By evening, Morgan's phone buzzed. Eli again. This time, real panic colored his tone. "I followed a group of bikers to an abandoned salvage yard," he said. "Heard them talking about taking revenge for last night's arrest. They mentioned your name, Morgan. You need to be on alert." Morgan swallowed hard. "You get out of there, Eli. Don't engage." She hung up, turning to Grace and Annalise with the news. Fear flickered in their eyes, but also a steely resolve. If the Iron Nomads wanted a war, they'd find a line of ordinary folk turned extraordinary by desperation, and a woman who'd learned how to handle worse adversaries in far harsher locales. As dusk deepened, they steeled themselves for another tense night. Officer Delgado pledged to circle by around midnight. A couple of ranchers volunteered to stake out vantage points near the highway. Morgan packed extra magazines for her sidearm, the familiar weight reminding her of countless missions that ended in bullets and smoke. But now she fought not for a distant cause, but for neighbors she'd come to care about. People whose daily joys and struggles she finally understood in a way soldiering never allowed. She prayed it wouldn't end in tragedy. Just past midnight, the tranquil facade shattered. The rumble of half a dozen motorcycles tore through the desert stillness, accompanied by a pickup truck's growl. Morgan, half dozing in a booth, jolted awake. Grace, who had tried to rest her eyes at the counter, snapped to attention. Annalise hurried from the back, shotgun in hand, flicking the interior lights off to minimize their visibility. Through the narrow slits in the boarded windows, Morgan glimpsed the headlights converging at the entrance. This was no small scouting party. The bikes fanned out across the dusty lot. The pickup halted behind them, engine idling ominously. Morgan's pulse thundered. This is it. She signaled Grace to stay low and dial the group chat, calling for immediate help. Annalise took up a defensive spot near the kitchen. Senses honed, Morgan crouched by the boarded window, sidearm ready. She counted at least 7 figures outside, some dismounting with firearms in hand. Dimly, she recalled the face of the captured biker who threatened them with her leader's name. Raven. If Raven was among them, he'd be the tall man stepping from the pickup, rifle in hand, scanning the diner as if it were a fortress. Their muffled voices carried. "Lights are off! They're in there!" came a growl from one of the bikers. Another barked, "We just burn it, boss?" A deeper voice responded, "Not yet." Morgan's chest tightened. She recognized the calm menace of someone used to calling shots. "We can't let them corner us." She had to buy time. The watchers on the perimeter would be racing to help, and Delgado was presumably en route. But they'd be outnumbered until then. Without warning, a volley of bullets shattered the front windows, showering the interior with splinters of glass and plywood. Morgan ducked, pressing herself to the floor. She heard Annalise let out a startled gasp from the kitchen. Adrenaline seized Morgan's limbs. She raised her head, for two shots back through the open space, hoping to discourage a frontal rush. Sparks flew as bullets pinged off the metal frames of the diners and tables. Another voice outside cursed, "They're armed! Spread out!" A door slammed. Someone must have wrenched open the diner side entrance. Morgan's mind jumped. She'd reinforced that door, but a determined group could force their way. Grimly, she motioned for Grace to take cover behind the counter. Heart pounding, Morgan crept along the hallway leading to the side door. She glimpsed two men prying at the barricade. She fired a warning shot overhead, plaster raining down. "Step back!" she yelled. One turned, returning fire. Another bullet whizzed past Morgan's ear, lodging into the wall with a solid thud. Outside, the pickup truck revved, possibly repositioning. The squeal of tires on gravel signaled it might attempt a ramming maneuver. Morgan's thoughts raced. If that truck broke through the diner's front, they'd be pinned inside. She cursed under her breath, firing another pair of shots to push back the intruders at the side. From the corner of her eye, she noticed Grace rummaging for something behind the counter. "Call Delgado," Morgan shouted, though the phone had likely already been used. The gunfire was near deafening. Panic threatened to claw at Morgan's edges, but her old training clamped down, methodically guiding her movements. Aim, fire, move, breathe. Suddenly, an explosion of glass signaled the front door caving in. A figure lunged through the splintered opening, brandishing a shotgun. Morgan pivoted, adrenaline spiking. She fired once, her shot hitting the doorframe. The intruder blasted the diner's ceiling. Debris showered down. Annalise, in a burst of mother bear fury, fired her own shotgun from the kitchen. The buckshot tore into the intruder's shoulder, sending him reeling back outside with a wail. Through the swirl of dust, Morgan caught a glimpse of the pickup's headlights sweeping across the interior. Right before the vehicle slammed on its brakes, presumably to avoid hitting the wounded biker. Meanwhile, outside, she heard other engines and the pop of gunfire. Reinforcements or Delgado? She prayed it was help. The door behind her gave a final splintering crack, and the two men from the side entry forced it open. Morgan whirled, finger on the trigger, gaze full of lethal resolve. In the blur that followed, Morgan's Delta Force reflexes fully emerged. She fired twice at the nearest intruder, catching him in the torso. The second man dove behind a toppled table, returning sporadic shots that ricocheted off tile and metal. Smoke from gunpowder mingled with the smell of burnt insulation. Every corner of the diner echoed with chaos. Grace ducked under the counter, trembling, but still trying to relay updates into her phone's microphone, urging watchers to converge. Through the shattered front, Morgan glimpsed more confusion. At least two ranchers had arrived in their pickups, headlights angled at the bikers. She heard the crack of rifles, locals firing from behind truck doors. The iron nomads found themselves caught in a crossfire. Some tried to rev their bikes and retreat, but the swirling gunfight made quick escape difficult. In the midst, a tall man with a rifle shouted instructions. She guessed this was Raven, the rumored top dog. He gestured angrily at the diner, barking for his people to regroup. Morgan pinned down the second intruder, who cowered behind an overturned booth. She called out, "Drop your weapon!" He fired blindly, hitting the soda machine. Liquid spewed in a foamy arc. Morgan cursed, took aim, and squeezed the trigger. Click. She was out of rounds. Her heart lurched. She scrambled back behind the serving counter, fumbling for a spare magazine. Another bullet whined overhead, sending cups and menus cascading onto the floor. The instant her pistol was reloaded, she leaned out again. But the intruder had vanished, leaving a spatter of blood on the tiles that suggested he'd been hit. She glimpsed him staggering out the door, presumably to flee. Outside, the pitched gunfight continued. From the blasts of rifle fire, Morgan could tell the watchers and possibly Officer Delgado were exchanging shots with the nomads. The roar of the pickup truck engine blended with the revving of bikes, shouts, and cursing. Annalise stepped forward, shotgun in hand, scanning for any immediate threat inside. Morgan nodded to her, acknowledging the older woman's courage. "Check on Grace," Morgan said, moving toward the jagged hole that was once the diner's front entrance. Crouching low, she peered out. The lot was littered with bullet casings, a few incapacitated bikers on the ground. One rancher's truck had bullet holes peppered across its hood. She spotted Delgado's patrol car, lights flashing, sliding to a stop near the gas pumps. He and another deputy jumped out, weapons drawn, shouting for everyone to drop arms. Some of the bikers tried to peel away, riding off into the darkness. Raven stood in front, blood staining his shirt, rifle clutched. The moment Delgado aimed a spotlight at him, Raven hesitated. He jerked his chin at the remaining iron nomads, hollering, "Pull back!" His glare caught Morgan's for a split second, so full of wrath it made her blood run cold. In that moment, she could almost hear him vowing revenge. Then he and two others mounted their bikes, tires squealing on asphalt, leaving behind their wounded. Another biker attempted to climb into the battered pickup, but an off-duty rancher fired a shot that shattered the windshield. The man dropped to the ground in surrender. As sirens wailed closer, the bikers who could still ride fled. The rest faced the arrival of more patrol cars, their prospects bleak. Morgan found herself panting at the entrance, pistol barrel smoking, adrenaline coursing like electricity through her veins. The next half hour was a whirlwind. Deputies secured the scene, disarming wounded nomads. EMTs arrived, treating the injured on both sides. One rancher had a bullet graze on his arm. Two bikers were in serious but stable condition. The diner was in shambles, shattered glass, bullet-ridden walls, spilled food, and scorch marks. But Grace and Annalise were miraculously unharmed, aside from a few bruises and a world of fright. Morgan stumbled out, letting a paramedic examine a cut on her forehead she hadn't even realized she had. Looking around, she spotted Delgado stepping over broken glass, giving her a nod of respect. "Hell of a fight," he muttered. "You saved lives tonight." Morgan just exhaled, quietly stunned by the destruction. She saw Annalise hugging Grace, tears rolling down their faces in relief. Ranchers milled about, some clapping one another on the back, acknowledging they'd just repelled a small army. It felt surreal, a moment both triumphant and sobering. In the distance, the wail of sirens grew faint as the situation was contained. Raven was still out there, presumably with a vendetta. But the Iron Nomads had been dealt a heavy blow. Like a dark tide receding, they'd lost significant ground. High Desert Oasis stood battered yet unbroken. As Morgan gazed at the bullet-scarred walls under the flickering fluorescent sign, she thought of how this was a microcosm of so many battles she'd fought, outnumbered defenders clinging to hope, forging a community out of necessity, and rediscovering that justice could blossom in the harshest conditions. She walked back inside, helping Annalise steady her trembling hands. Grace mustered a watery smile, tears still glistening. "We did it," she whispered. Morgan nodded. "Yeah," she replied, voice thick with emotion. "But it's not over. We need to stay vigilant." Annalise, eyes fierce despite her exhaustion, simply said, "They picked the wrong diner to mess with." The wind carried away the acrid smoke, leaving behind the battered refuge that was High Desert Oasis, a testament to how ordinary folks, galvanized by a single determined ex-soldier, could stand against tyranny and refuse to bow. In the following days, authorities launched a countywide crackdown. Raven's name was circulated, and though he remained at large, the Iron Nomad's grip loosened with so many arrests and an empowered, watchful local community. Repairs began. Reinforcements took shape, not just in wood and metal, but in unity. And Morgan Lane, the unassuming trucker with a hidden Delta Force past, found a sense of belonging and purpose she never expected, all in the dusty heart of a high desert highway that refused to surrender to fear. In the end, this isn't just a tale of battles won or lost. It's a story of rediscovering faith in one another. A hardened Delta Force veteran found herself becoming a guardian for a humble truck stop, helping new friends defend their livelihoods. Meanwhile, those everyday folks tapped into their own reserves of courage, standing tall where fear might have otherwise prevailed. From the dusty parking lot to the hospital wards and back to those well-worn diner booths, everyone pulled together to triumph against threats meant to tear them apart. Looking around at the restored diner and the supportive neighbors, there's a powerful sense of solidarity. It proves that ordinary communities can rise above bullying and violence when they unite, and that even a lone individual carrying the weight of a secret past can spark lasting change. We'd love to hear what you think about this story's themes of resilience, hope, and unexpected heroism. Drop a comment below to share your thoughts, debate the key moments, and connect with others who believe in standing up for what's right. Your voice matters. Let's keep the conversation going.